thank you to everyone who's come. I'm sure more people will be coming in over the next few minutes, but I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for our speaker tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. My name's Beth Salerno. I'm the Interim Program Director at New Hampshire Humanities. I'm delighted to be here. I want to welcome you to tonight's program, which looks at this supposedly obscure underground and alternative comic, which now is this, as they say, superstar, the world's most beloved reptilian assassins. Before we begin, I want to just have 3 quick housekeeping items, and then I'll introduce our great speaker tonight. First of all, funding. All the programs of New Hampshire Humanities are made possible by the National Endowment for the Humanities and donations from New Hampshire Humanities supporters. Last year, we produced 1,000 programs. They reached more than 33,000 people in 181 communities across New Hampshire. And I hope all of you got an opportunity to see something close to you as well as online. We also partnered with 414 organizations. If you'd like to know more about programming in your area, or if you'd like to make a donation, or if you'd like to sign up for our e-news, which lists all of our activities, please sign up at our website. Second, if you have any problems with tonight's performance event, if you are finding you have a technological issue, please put it in the chat and we'll help if we possibly can. But if you have a question that you would like to ask our presenter tonight, please put it in the Q&A button. These should be at the bottom of your screen, the chat button for technological questions, the Q&A button for the presenter. And we will search through that for questions for the presenter. Finally, we ask that you keep your questions focused on the presentation. Now let me get to the important part, introducing our presenter tonight. We're really honored to have Daniel Yesbick with us tonight. He's a professor of English and communications, but also intercultural education coordinator at Wildwood College outside of St. Louis, Missouri. He teaches media, literature, and writing courses. And he also serves as an adjunct professor for Webster University's School of Communications, as well as other places. He focuses on comics history, animal studies, Hollywood cinema, radio drama, and globalized Shakespeare, which seems like it should be a whole other presentation. He has written for many locations, including the Oxford Handbook of Comics Studies, which obviously is relevant to his talk for tonight. He lives in St. Louis, Missouri, with 2 quirky teen offspring, which may help explain his interest in tonight's topic, and 2 idiot rescue mutts. His wording, not mine. Please welcome Dr. Yesbick for tonight's presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Beth. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. And thank you, New Hampshire Humanities. I'm delighted to be here. It was a real honor to be asked. And thank you to Turtle Maniacs who decided to spend Friday night with us. I'm really, really grateful to have all of you with us tonight. So hopefully you'll find something worthwhile in the talk have and the discussion we'll have afterwards. As you probably know, the global merchandising media spectacle of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is much, much larger than we can possibly cover in 45 to 50 minutes. So there's certain things we just won't be able to talk about. I wish I had more time to talk about computer games. I wish I had more time to talk about the phenomenon that is turtle rap. I wish I had more time to talk about all the various renditions and avatars and upgrades of the animated series. But since comics is sort of where it all starts, and it's really, that's how New Hampshire fits into the whole story, I thought we'd focus there. Oh, if everyone's ready, let's get in our pizza truck and head on out. Here we go. I'll just start. Let's see. Here we go. So I've got the first couple slides are rather text heavy, just to kind of, in case anyone doesn't see the full span of what the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have done for the world. I just want to get several different perspectives on their massive influence. And also, unlike a lot of major media franchises like Star Wars or Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Archie or Disney, there are always controversies with these things. But one of the central tenets of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles has always been fun. It's always been satire, and there's a little bit of darkness and a little bit of tragedy here and there, but it really is about having a good time, entertaining, being entertained, and working for good and for the community as a whole. So anyway, here come our quotes. So this is from 2022 from the New York Times. Originally created in 1983 by the comic book artists Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were imagined as a kind of postmodern, semi-ironic send-up of the popular superhero comics of the era, particularly Marvel's Daredevil and X-Men. With their punky, slang-heavy bite and flip, easygoing demeanor, they were the embodiment of a certain brand of savvy Gen X cool that peaked with the arrival of the 90s. Sarcastic and streetwise, borrowing elements from prevailing trends like surf culture and hip-hop. And that's just one of many variations. And you can see the original four characters, Donatello, Michelangelo, Leonardo, have built a pretty big turtle verse of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sidebar characters who are just as beloved, who have their own fascinating story arcs, and who fold over into other people's stories and other franchises and crossovers as well. So this is the special anniversary cover of the 150th issue of the IDW series, just giving you some idea of both the artistic and the consumer joy in seeing this series continue. All right. So this is from the old Mirage Studios website. That's just kind of a husk of a website left. But they do want to let us know what they managed to achieve, and I think that's very important. So all of this text comes from there. And then this is just a random turtle fan who put their turtle collection up online just to show you the extent of which, no matter what your loved ones collected, it's not quite as bad as what it could be, right? So here we are. So for those of you who don't realize, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle legacy is substantial. It was rated the #1 daily syndicated animated TV strip for children, strip meaning for a period of time, #1 rated Saturday morning TV show, and highest rated in its time slot ever for CBS. The top grossing independent film when released in 1990, and one of the 4 or 5 top grossing independent films of all time in throughout up until the early 2000s. The #1 best-selling toy line in 1991, above both G.I. Joe and Barbie. The #1 male-oriented, and there's all kinds of gender questions there, figure toy in 1990 and 91 with over 70% market share. The #1 live touring arena show, all ages show in the US for the 1990s. The #1 Nintendo 8-bit and Game Boy video game in the world in 1991. That's a powerful statement, that is. And the #1 kids breakfast cereal in the world from Ralston Purina in 1991, the iconic cereal box and its free plastic bowl that so many kids love so much. We'll talk about that later. And this is fascinating to me. The only non-Disney characters to appear on the cover of a Disney magazine and at Disney theme parks. And I spend a lot of time studying and teaching Disney, and that is truly a remarkable exception. So along the way to setting the above records, the Turtles became the most successful character introduction in media merchandise history, and redefined the children's entertainment and trademark licensing and merchandising businesses for all time. So, and there's a little bit of bragging there, but that is all pretty much legit. So where did it all come from? How did it all come together? These are just 4 different views on the Turtles from the beginnings to kind of now. So this is from that same New York Times article. From the moments, let's move this over a second. From the moment Eastman and Laird's original Turtle Ninjas comic book was adapted for broadcast syndication into an animated series in the same name in '87, the 4 superpowered, wisecracking reptilian heroes at its center, named after Renaissance artists in a manner typical of the franchise's working humor, became veritable matinee idols, cartoon superstars adored by children throughout North America and beyond. And there is something about the 4 brothers, the concept of the 4 brothers, made clearly recognizable by the 4 different colored masks that they wear only in the TV show. They originally in the comics had well, it was originally black and white, but then only red masks. But that allowed different people to distinguish and develop relationships with each of the 4 characters in different ways. It was an instant smash, and the Turtles soon branched out into other media, including films, an animated TV series, multiple toy and merchandise tie-ins, and even a live-action television program. The success came at the cost of their identity, however, as the original funky nature of the Turtles comic became more cartoonish and child-friendly to better facilitate their mass acceptance. And I put this in here because this is the most common debate around the original comic book Turtles from the independent comics of the 80s and the massively popular mass media Cowabunga pizza chugging Turtles. The other ones had pizza too, but they would also have beer and tell not dirty jokes, but sort of ribald jokes now and again. They were a little more, they had a little bit more frat boy college culture to it than the all ages show. And a lot of people will say, as it says here, they lost their funky nature. But the quality always stayed high. They did work in a different mode, but that is one of the great debates in turtle fandom is not necessarily which one is more authentic than the other, but which one do different fans tend to prefer. Do they like their turtles a little bit darker and a little more post-adolescent, or do they prefer them as sort of child heroes in more of the Scooby-Doo and SpongeBob kind of world? So that's just one debate to have. Their original print run for their first comic book was only a few thousand copies, but by the peak of their popularity, they were selling 700,000 copies of each issue, and 90% of all American boys between ages 3 and 8 owned at least one action figure. Between 87 and 92, it would have been hard to find a boy in America who was not a fan. And the Heroes in the Half Shell were not just the most famous independent comic book ever. At one point, they were the biggest thing in popular culture, and that's the period that we call Turtle Mania, roughly from about 1992 to 1995. Finally, the Turtles were perhaps the best example of an unexpected publishing and licensing success between 1984 and 1993. The comic sales were closely connected to the massive success of the multimedia empire that eventually encompassed merchandise, a television show, theatrical movies, making of this franchise a popular culture sensation in the late 80s and early 90s, especially for younger audiences. Turtles were virtually everywhere in children's culture of the period, but they were virtually everywhere in a lot of other cultures as well. Certainly in older teen and college level comic book readers, certainly there was a hipster culture associated with those early turtle stories. There was also a kind of an avant-garde animal activist kind of fandom going as well, because many of the stories had an ecocentric eco-environmental conflict going on with them. They were also technically science fiction. They're kind of a Frankenstein story. The turtles are transformed, mutated into hybridized creatures. So there was a science fiction and kind of a genetics argument as well. And the one thing that none of these quotes talk about, which I find fascinating, is that the early stories are really very, very urban. They have a lot of urban diversity in them. There are African American characters, there are Hispanic American characters, Rican characters. There's a real sense of the diversity and the multiplicity of city living going on there. And that some people argue that that gets taken away, that it gets whitewashed per se. Other people say it just becomes mainstreamed. Again, that's a debate that's larger than what we can have here, but we want to introduce that issue just to sort of see where we might want to take it. All right. The actual story of the two men behind it is a fascinating one as artists, as creators, and as friends. And they've had their ups and downs and their separations and their reunions. Currently, they get along just fine, and I expect that they will from now on. But the story of them creatively developing these characters together is one of the most heartening I have ever read in the history of comics creation, and maybe also in the history of animation. These characters, these four turtle warrior brothers, really are built out of friendship. So in 1982, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird meet working at a Maine lobster restaurant. In 1983, they're sharing a house at 28 Union Street in Dover, in Dover, where they're sitting around watching TV and they're drawing. They're both artists. They both went to art school, and kind of looking for characters they can experiment with. They're big comics fans. They're TV fans. They're movie fans, and it just kind of happens by accident. And I'll show you the details of that in a second. But the house itself became their first studio. So here are pictures of them working on their first comic, working on the calendar, doing all of the business of organizing the manufacture, printing, and distribution of an independent comic book in the early 1980s. And you can see they're having a good old time. This is the house itself. This is the birthplace of the Turtles. And as this article from New Hampshire Magazine from 2020 says, the house was torn down in 2011. Decades after, we should have known better. Today, it's a mere blank space in a neighborhood, and it looks like this. This empty spot right here is where the house used to be. There was nothing on the property when I visited but a dumpster and some dirty snow. I mean, we have an Archie statue in Meredith because the illustrator of that comic was from there. We definitely should have some Ninja Turtle statues in Dover. We'd all benefit from a little turtle. And that article clearly went somewhere because we do have a historical marker now just across the street from that empty lot. And they have also the actual studio, Mirage Studios, once they became successful, moved to Northampton, Massachusetts. So this is the official history of that studio, at least for the three major years of turtle production. So this was the managed to put in a suitably fun, I think, uh, memorial manhole cover, which you can go in, which intense turtle fans have gone on pilgrimage to see right there at the spot. If you look online, there are hundreds and hundreds of selfies of people wearing their Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle fan shirts or clothes, or even in costume, getting pictures taken by the manhole cover. So that's kind of fun. But why do we have that manhole cover? Why do we have that historical marker? What actually happened there? This is the actual story, and these are some of the earliest drawings. The first turtle, right? So they were sitting around the living room, they've been watching a number of bad TV shows, TJ Hooker, The A-Team, and Love Connection, all of which have very little to do with the turtles, but still. And we got real punchy. And for some reason, I did a sketch of a turtle with a mask. Pete, sorry, one second. Pete did one and another. And then I said, wait. I drew 4 turtles, each with a different weapon. I said, why not call them Ninja Turtles? Pete said, why not call them Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? And from there on is where it kind of begins. And that's from an interview from 1988 from the New York Times. So these are really the first 2 sort of sparring drawings that they did to get started. And then this is the uh, drawing of the 4, which has since sold at auction at the Prestige Heritage site in Texas for outrageous amounts of money. I don't remember how much, but still, it's interesting to see the actual DNA of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and how we go from these sort of early fun sketches. They're built out of fun. They're built out of brotherhood. They're built out of sitting around, being creatively interactive with TV, and it sort of comes out. That leads to the very, very successful original independently published Mirage series. This is a reprint of the first issue. Leads to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of variations over the years in action figure lines. And toy companies tend to love the Turtles because it's not like Batman, where a kid can buy Batman and then he's done. Or you can buy Spider-Man or Miles Morales and be done. You're not going to spend anymore. But with the Turtles, you got to have 4, right? And you're probably going to have your favorite, and then your other ones are going to come later. So there's something really commercially interesting about the 4 brothers coming together and people collecting the 4 brothers, playing the 4 brothers differently also. Here's a more current iteration where you can see, even though the colored masks were born out of the animated series, you can see a lot of the comics use that as well to differentiate them. We even change the colors a little bit sometimes. These 4 turtle characters have had so many different forms and shapes and upgrades and reboots over the years. It seems like every years now we tend to get a new one. This is the most current and controversial one. um, uh, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird have done kind of an apocalyptic last turtle story called The Last Ronin. And the fascinating thing about all the turtle stories, except for the ones that are made for very little kids, is that they really do balance comedy and tragedy really, really well. There are moments of great humor and moments of great satire, but there are also moments of incredible pathos and even sort of tragic hubris. So this story, which is billed as being quite dark, is still full of all kinds of interesting creative ideas. It's based on a story they had many, many years ago. And it was a huge hit with comics fans, a pretty significant hit with Turtles fans, and it has now been optioned for a film, which everyone is expecting, which then, of course, creates a whole new group of fans before the movie comes out. And those are the speculators who are buying up every copy they can get to sell at a premium if the film does well. So we keep, again, reiterating different turtleverse stories, turtle forms, turtle art, turtle concepts. It's really interesting to see how it all fits together. All right, this is what I'm going to be talking about mostly today. Why are not just turtles, but why are anthropomorphic animals, why are walking, talking animals, even warrior animals, so interesting to us? How does the turtle fit into that in myth and in science? And then we'll talk a little bit about what Eastman and Laird were playing with, the different kinds of story concepts and hero concepts they were satirizing in the 80s. We'll talk a little bit about adaptation, then we'll talk about the toy cultures and how they really matter, and then just a few final thoughts, and then your questions and my immense gratitude, really. All right, first of all, anthropomorphic art is not new. It didn't come from animation. It came from way before back we were really manufacturing anything. Why are we always creatively and artistically and lingually interested in humanizing animals? And why are we humanizing animal warriors? What is the larger benefit of fantasizing about rabbit people and wolf people, and uh, how is it always seem to be involving both visual art and prose narrative at the same time? We can go all the way back to things like Renard the Fox or Chanticleer the Rooster. And there's a kind of mythic connection to something like Gustave Doré's rendition of Puss in Boots, which is clearly used as a model for the Puss in Boots in the films. And I love this engraving especially because if you look, you see the cat is all about the fun. The cat is all about the adventure. He's all about the boots too, and he's all about that really styling hat. I'm a little jealous. But if you look in the background, you'll see there's a kind of a freaked out human there. And it's interesting that human art, human engraving, human storytelling would emphasize the animal first as the hero and leave us kind of in the shadows, kind of watching animals for lessons and for our own sort of heroic and ethical and interactive needs with the world around us. So the animalizing of humans and the humanizing of animals is always incredibly empowering, and it's always very creative. And there's lots of questions and animal studies people go on all the time about why. It's very suggestively playful and cautionary. It can be both empowering. We are projecting our personalities onto our pets, or it can be very cautionary. These animals are supposed to be base species. Humans are supposed to be superior, and yet the animals behave better to each other, that kind of thing. It's a very moralized kind of tone. And there's all kinds of transgressions in it, too. It's not natural, conventional, or familiar. And basically, Scooby-Doo and SpongeBob make the world less boring for kids and for us. We also tend to infantilize it and turn it into a juvenile media, maybe because it is so powerful. We tend to associate it with, kids' teddy bears and kids' picture books and storybooks. But a lot of those stories have a lot more powerful potential, like Yertle the Turtle, lessons for adults as they do for children. The most philosophical thing I'm going to say all day, and I have to put it in here because the turtles are part of this. A lot of people theorize as kind of at what the French call an émulsifiant gap between human logic and reason and culture, which we have to learn, which is constructed, versus our separation from the natural animal world, from the instinct, from the urge, from the nature that most living creatures survive with. So when we do create talking, walking animals, there's nothing real animal about them at all. They don't smell like animals. They don't act like animals. But we use them as kind of a bridge, a kind of cognitive or aesthetic bridge that allow us to feel not so bad about being separated from that world. And some people really make a big difference between these two words. All of this is what we call anthropomorphic. We're projecting human traits onto animal bodies or vice versa. But there's really two extremes. There's the theriomorphic and the therianmorphic. And I'm going to go through this very quickly. Here's a perfect example. This ad shows a possum shaking hands with a teddy bear, but that's not really what it's about at all. It's really about Teddy Roosevelt leaving the White House as Taft takes over. So we're projecting human personalities onto these animal bodies, right? Mickey Mouse, of course, does the same thing, and I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but there's a significant debate right now about how much of Iwerk's early Oswald and Mickey Mouse designs were based on minstrel and racist traditions. That doesn't mean that we can't enjoy Mickey Mouse, but with the white gloves and the black faces and some of the behaviors that they have, we've seen how these very carefully constructed, beautifully designed personalities, media personalities, are borrowing from all kinds of different comedies that went before. Some of them rather crude and grotesque. So that happens all the time. Karl Barks's Uncle Scrooge is the same thing, right? There's a lot of condemnation of human greed in this character who's basically a duck, right? And then many of you are going to be very familiar with pogo possum and the various and consistent that were involved in the debates between Pogo and Albert and Cherchez La Femme and other characters. But theriomorphic basically means that we have an actual animal that talks like a human. It doesn't walk on two legs like a human would. It doesn't necessarily wear clothes, but Aesop's fables, the animals talk to each other. Geoffrey Chaucer's The Parliament of Birds, animals talk to each other. Watership Down, the rabbits are, living through the Odyssey, right? And Snoopy, everyone's favorite anthropomorphic creature, is always a dog, right? He might dance like a human, he might do all kinds of human things, but he's always a dog. So there's a little bit of theriomorphic basis there. Therianmorphic is the other way, some sort of fusion or hybrid of human and animal forms, animals walking around on 2 feet wearing clothes, animals that are farm animals, but also are starting to walk around and take on human vices and sins, like George Orwell's Animal Farm. And even the dressing up of superheroes. It's not a man, it's a Batman. It's not a spider, it's a Spider-Man. Why do we put on these animal skins? Why do we envy them their powers when we are, we're using all of our human ingenuity and all of our human cerebral potential to put ourselves back into the animal world. It's sort of fascinating that way. And even Snoopy fantasizes about being a human, right? The World War One flying ace, a sort of historical human taking on the Red Baron. So this scale is never clean. It's always very, very muddy, and there's lots of things in the middle. And right in the middle, between the theriomorphic and the therianmorphic, are the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But before we get to the Ninja Turtles, let's talk about actual turtles. A lot of animal science and animal studies scholars say it's really important that if we talk about Donald Duck, we need to talk about ducks. Just briefly, if we talk about we got to talk about the barrier reef, and I think that's fair. So sea turtles actually do have a kind of martial arts. They do actually chop and flop and punch at each other, sometimes just for practice or fun or for mating, and sometimes so they can crack open their scallops with their dexterous flippers. So there's a little cowabunga action right there in the wild for you. Turtles, tortoises, and terrapins, very tough for non-experts to differentiate, and there are a lot of them. 360 known species of turtle, 7 species of sea turtle, and they have survived for millions of years in just about everywhere any other animal can survive. They are very important parts of our global sustainability. Turtle dung is essential to the Great Barrier Reef seagrass meadows. And the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles themselves have brought substantial awareness to green and eco-substantial science and conservation. Their origins, their actual origin story, which is right here, is rooted in sort of the myths of big city living. This irresponsible driver who's doing toxic waste isn't paying attention and almost hurts a blind pedestrian. We'll talk about who that is in a minute. But the waste hits a little kid's pet turtles who wind up down in the sewer. And then we have sort of the myths of the pets who've been flushed, as humans aren't don't tend to be responsible pet owners down in the manhole, and the little turtles roll around in the muck, the glowing ooze, the radioactive ooze. So there's allegories about pollution here. There's allegories about human husbandry and responsibility for animals. There's statements about animal rights, and there's also statements about the ability of life to adapt to all kinds of difficult situations and scenarios. And more than once in the animated films, in the animated TV shows and in the live action films and in the comics, there are constant references to eco-sustainable science and conservation. Their actual popularity has led to substantial orphan turtle colonies, but it's also led people to put together turtle rescues. And it's led to interspecies breedings of turtles that we not had before. And it's led to all kinds of extra awareness about how to treat your pet turtle and what you should do with your pet turtle and how to have more than one pet turtle. So as with most cases, there are a lot of examples of us becoming better about animals and us also making some mistakes with animals because of the inspiration from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, I do want to say that the next thing I'm going to show you, I think, is fairly ridiculous. This is from the Chicago Tribune from 1991. And this is a political commentator saying that he believes that the turtles are bad for children. The muscle-bound little reptiles, I regret to inform you, have a political agenda, which is the same color as their shells, green. No content, not content with entertaining, not, I'm sorry, excuse me, not content with entertaining children, the turtles want to indoctrinate them in environmental dogma and put them to work spreading it. This article has been laughed at for decades ever since. And that is, I mean, if you're watching Turtle Heroes and your favorite characters as a child are Ninja Warrior turtles, you're probably gonna be kind of green anyway. It would be my feeling. And he's really responding to this origin story, thinking it's some kind of um, anti-pollution propaganda or something like that. For those of you who know comics well, the story is actually a very thinly veiled homage to the origin of Marvel Comics Daredevil, who saves an old man from getting hit by a runaway driver and gets radioactive goop in his eyes, which then makes him a blind superhero. So just to show that there's all kinds of layers going on here. Turtles themselves have a fascinating mythology. The great thinker Aeschylus, the great playwright Aeschylus, was apparently killed when a turtle was dropped from above from his head by an eagle. There's the great Sumerian Babylonian myth about the turtle monster Asog. Theseus has to defeat Siron in his giant turtle trap in the Odyssey, which becomes a big part of the Percy Jackson books. The strength and the safety and security of the turtle shell became part of the Roman nation. The same thing happened with the Korean Jeobuksun turtle ship, which is one of the first armored ships. And then even Wild American Inventors' first submarine, single-man submarine, was called the Turtle. And I'm hoping some of you, having been in New Hampshire, will story of David Bushnell, because he's a fascinating character. He's not from New Hampshire, but he's just a fascinating early American inventor. All right, so we'll go to that. The other thing that the turtles tie to are the long standing tradition of anthropomorphic funny animals and hero animals that are rooted in comics. As you can see, we've got Disney properties, Warner Brothers properties, other media properties like Lone Ranger's Silver and Lassie, MGM's Lassie, and these were the best-selling comics of all time. They outsold any superheroes throughout the 50s and 60s. And one company had pretty much the rights to all of them. And these were the most beloved and the most popular and the most wholesome comics, although they could also be pretty socially critical at times. Even newspaper comic strips like George Herman's Crazy Cat had a lot to say about race and gender. Garfield is all about a lazy cat, but it's really all about lazy 1980s decadence, right? And Fritz the Cat and the underground comics of the 1960s really do pretty terrible things and behave very badly and irresponsibly as an attack on these earlier stories that people read as kids. They're sort of filthifying and dirtying up and deconstructing and debasing these funny animal play pals from before. And characters like Fritz the Cat, Arkham's Fritz the Cat, or Gilbert Sheldon's Wonder Warthog, these are characters who do pretty awful things. They steal, they fornicate, they exploit people, they rip each other, and they wind up pretty miserable for doing so. They're usually pretty humiliated by the end. The Turtles have a little bit of that in them. They're kind of coming out of the last wave of those kinds of comics that were not meant for the mainstream at all. They were sold in head shops, record stores, and in bars and on the street and in alternative and radical bookstores. So the same kind of thing is happening here. And these stories also had some pretty powerful messages. Donald Duck and the Golden Helmet is Carl Barks' version of the Lord of the Rings saga. And whoever gets a hold of the Golden Helmet becomes sort of a fascist dictator for all of North America. So even little kids' comics could have these kinds of stories. And I threw this in because we never get to talk about single panel cartoons anymore. This is Edwina Dumm's Wonderful Tippy, which is just a very basic animal cartoon. But it's full of so much life and love, and it's an early woman cartoonist, and it's been recently reprinted, and it has a lot of the same kind of animal joy that we see in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I know everyone loves a good dog story. This is a great dog story, so I just wanted to throw that. That's my little extra gift to you. So how do the turtles come to be? Here is the basic process. When Eastman and Laird start developing the book themselves, and it's very unusual. Most of the time, you often have comic book creators collaborating. Usually, one's a writer, and one's the artist, and maybe we have an inker or a letter or a colorist, and some may share multiple jobs. But Eastman and Laird made sure, as they were both visual artists, that they worked on every page together. So it was a very collaborative, natural, artistic process. So I want to see, this is them talking about it themselves. We made a strenuous effort to have each of us pencil and ink on every page. Our working method involved literally passing the pages back and forth in an attempt to get a true blending of our respective styles. Unique collaborative method of blending that no doubt contributed to the public's overwhelming acceptance of this strange and exciting new series. Both Eastman and Laird credit the giants that came before, such as Jack Kirby, the contemporary innovators working around them, like Frank Miller, and the groundbreaking self-publishers of the day, such as Dave Sim, as the leading inspirations behind TMNT. Even the first issue depicts one of the turtles holding up a sign saying this book is dedicated to Jack Kirby and Frank Miller. And here is that actual image. And Kirby responded. Kirby was very old at the time. He did like the book. He responded by giving them 2 pinups. That's how comics creators, especially artists, will usually celebrate each other. They'll do a pinup for the back of the book. And Kirby has done 2 that have since been sold as prints. Miller himself also liked the book and allowed himself to be photographed holding it. And when you see how much they pay homage to Frank Miller, you won't be surprised by that at all. These are newer Turtles comics. This is not Eastman and Laird at work. But at the top, you see Frank Miller's Daredevil, very iconic and famous and influential cover. At the bottom, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle homage to Frank Miller is still going on, just with different artists in a new age. These are Fred Hembeck drawings, and he has his own wonderful legacy of animal art and cartooning. But in the 1980s, comic books are becoming very serious. We, of course, have Art Spiegelman's Mouse. We have Frank Miller's Daredevil. We've got Chris Claremont and Frank Miller's Wolverine. We're getting these dark, angry, largely toxic, largely disturbed comics and heroes. And I always love to point out this Daredevil book in particular, because this is, look at this cut line. How does a man search for his own soul? This is on the cover of a 60-cent children's comic that you can buy at 7-Eleven. So that tells you there's something going on here that's a little more than just fisticuffs, right? These 2 covers by Miller, you can see just how much Eastman and Laird are aping their style, paying homage to their style. In the world of comics, the greatest homage is satire. The greatest comic, the greatest thing you can do is make fun of somebody else's work. That's the ultimate sort of compliment. And the Turtles are a combination of Fritz the Cat and Donald Duck and Pogo and Tom and Jerry and Crazy Cat and Frank Miller's Daredevil and Chris Claremont's X-Men, all kind of mixed together. The 4 brothers allow for a team book dynamic as well. For those of you who don't know, the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics, which were published, were black and white and magazine sized. So they were large. So this is what and they also, almost every comic book ever puts an ad on the back cover, because that way you save some money. You get some sort of sponsoring, some sort of sponsorship. But the early Turtles books did not. They really wanted to show off their incredible cover designs. This is the 2nd issue, and you can see how visually interesting this is with the turtle reflections coming at the robot. The 3rd one I find especially interesting because, as I said, is a very urban inner city kind of cover, and it's a very fun and multicultural story as well. And again, we use the front and back cover of this magazine-sized, oversized book. The Turtles are hardly even in it. You just see them over here just for a moment in the van. And then number 4 is probably their best early effort. Just an incredible fusion of anthropomorphic animal and science fiction and combat stories all getting blended together. You can see as the series go on, they get better and better at coloring and working with these cover formats. This one's going to become very important, but you can see we're also borrowing fantasy and sword and sorcery stuff, and there's a zombie army in the background there, and we just keep building and building in our various mythologies as we move forward. This is an actual page from Frank Miller showing his combat techniques in Daredevil. This is a page from Eastman and Laird's first issue of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You can see the homage, it's obvious. Same thing here. One of the most famous pages Miller ever did, Bullseye versus Elektra. And if you notice the figure ground technique here, you can see the same thing happening right here. You can see how they've studied his work so carefully, and they're mimicking it but not mocking it, because these stories wind up very, very differently. They're both very violent, and they're both about martial arts conflict, but you can see the challenges here. All right. Because of the enormous immediate success of the strangely named Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, of course, there are copycats. So we get right away, and you can see how deliberate this copycat is. I mean, the cover's the same, cover design's the same, the color palette's the same, the fonts are the same, but now it's adolescent radioactive black belt hamsters. But we don't stop there. We get the preteen dirty jean kung fu kangaroos, which is actually by a very, very important underground comics artist, a woman artist. So that's her take on it. This cover is also a parody of another science fiction comic at the time. So you've got like a triple parody going on. And all of these sell really, really well, partially because the Turtles have created a fad and people want to read more sort of angry animal stories, but also because the speculators are going crazy, because the first issues of the Turtles are very, very expensive on the market. So everyone's trying to see what the next big hit will be. We even have comics making fun of the concept. Geriatric gangrene jujitsu gerbils. I love this guy. And Frank Miller is brought onto DC to revise Batman in what is one of the most important Bat books ever made. That also gets an angry animal parody. Nat Rat, The Dark Gnat Returns by Mark Martin. Mark Martin would eventually go on to work for Eastman and Laird, telling some of the best later turtle stories. So they see him working in the same satiric vein. And this has it all. If you look down at the bottom there, colossal nuclear bambino samurai snails, adolescent maniacal samurai hares, radioactive wrestling rodents. It really did become a problem. There were almost so many overextended, over-signified animal concepts that eventually Dark Horse produces a book called Boris the Bear, who slaughters the teenage radioactive black belt mutant ninja critters because everyone's had bloody enough, right? It's actually, Boris the Bear is actually not a bad book at all. And other series that had already existed get a bump, an enormous bump, sometimes financially, sometimes in terms of readership, and sometimes they get, because of the success with the Turtles in media adaptation, they get considered for media adaptation as well. So a lot of who are doing angry animal stuff, like Dave Sim Cerebus or Stan Yojimbo, are suddenly doing much better than they would have otherwise. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but Cerebus is one of the great comic series in the history of world comics. A barbarian aardvark. And it also spends a lot of time making fun of superhero stories. But Eastman and Laird loved Cerebus. So Cerebus eventually also becomes a very political book, like the Turtles. President and prime minister, and then a kind of a religious leader, and he's not very good at it. But he eventually guest stars in that issue of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, where Sim is doing some of the work as well. So you can see how Cerebus gets a bumper, gets a nod from Dan Sakai's book. Also, Yosaji Yojimbo appears frequently throughout the comics. He crossovers with the Turtles. He crossovers in the animated series as well. He gets some of his own animated specials because of the success of Turtle fans liking his work so much. And it's really interesting because Stan Sakai is, of course, a Japanese American, and he has one of the longest running Asian American comics epics about this incredible Ronin rabbit. And it's one of the most interesting stories told in American comics. It's still being told in American comics, and we owe a lot of its longevity to its success alongside Eastman and Laird's Turtles. And then this, we go way far back to 1976. You might think, what could this cover possibly have to do with anything turtle related? In 1976, in Marvel Preview number 7, which is really all about Satana, there's a strange little backstory where this little dude shows up, this sort of angry mercenary space raccoon. Not really appear again until 1981 when he takes on the Incredible Hulk as Rocket Raccoon. He's named Rocket Raccoon in 76. But because of the Angry Animal boom, sponsored by Eastman and Laird, Marvel tries to get on it as well with taking this older character who was just meant to be a one-off joke and resurrecting him as kind of a Han Solo space buccaneer. And it doesn't really take off, but it gets noticed. And just to show you the scale and scope of these works, these are decades and decades and decades of great comics, great cartooning, great storytelling. Not so much for Rocket, although Rocket has had great series, but Rocket has had much more success as a CGI character voiced by Bradley Cooper for the Guardians of the Galaxy films, where, and I do not know a kid under 10 who does. So I don't know. A lot of adults love it. That really comes because of the Turtles' success. The comics themselves run through Mirage and Image for about 115 issues, give or take, from 1984 to 1995. You can see the list of all the major creators who get to put their spin on the book. This first one here, number 16, this is Mark Martin from the Nat Rat, satire really changing how the Turtles look. Uh, uh, Rick Veitch, who was an underground artist, kind of known for his outlandish, crazy cyberpunk science fiction stuff, gets to revise the books in a sort of a crazy nightmare world. His papers have just gone to the Columbia University Comics Collection, in case anyone's interested. And then Michael Zulli shows up and turns them into something not seen before. This is Splinter and the Four Turtles in kind of a mythic, epic, Babylonian kind of ancient world avatar. Fans love it. They just can't get enough of that kind of thing. And both new creators get to cut their teeth working on Eastman and Lard's concept, putting their own spin, their own flavors into the comics bouillabaisse, into the gumbo. And a lot of older creators do as well, including Richard Corbin, one of the greatest of American underground creators who just passed away not too long ago, who's known for his airbrush work. Both Eastman and Laird were big fans of Richard Corbin. So he gets a little bit of attention and a little bit of well-deserved respect for taking on some turtle projects as well. One of the first women to work on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is Mary Woodring, who has a really beautiful sense of color. You can see her really, really exploring how the turtles look at different times of day, different actions, different kinds of lighting. And then, of course, there's the kid series as well, which has the longtime Funny Animal artist Dave Garcia, our Funny Animal creator, and then the couple Ken and Beth Matroni doing what they do best, really making fun, wholesome, enjoyable stories, often based on the actual scripts for the episodes for the TV shows, but sometimes not. And exploring how to make great comics that aren't necessarily edgy or avant-garde or changing the medium at all, but just allowing kids to enjoy reading adventure stories in kind of a fun new way. And the comics have their own life in terms of crossovers also. The Turtles pair up with the Power Rangers, who may or may not have been based on the turtle concept. A lot of people think it comes from the Turtles. They team up with Batman many different times, which is, if you can imagine how much fun that is to read, pretty interesting. They team up with He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. I love that he's wearing the He-Man wig. They teamed up with the Ghostbusters and maybe the strangest one ever, not necessarily Archie, but they team up with the Stranger Things kids as well in the Upside Down kind of story. So the Turtles, the hybridity of the Turtles, the fact that they are teenage mutant ninja and who knows what else, allows them to fit into almost any kind of IP, any kind of narrative world or verse that you kind of want to put them in. So that's really interesting for a lot of people. Sometimes that's controversial. This is one of the first times we see April O'Neil on a cover, and you can see she's very different than how a lot of other people picture her. Sometimes she's a really, really evocative, feminist, independent, heroic character. Sometimes they use her as kind of an objectified TNA statement. Sometimes she's a young, adventuresome girl just looking to discover herself. Sometimes she's a badass warrior. This design is actually by one of the great Wonder Woman cover artist, Jenny Friesen, who's very, very much a feminist. So how we have all there's controversy. Some people say, oh, they whitewashed her, they took away her crimped hair and her ethnicity. Every artist does April differently. I'm not saying that isn't true. I have not deeply into the issue, but I do know that April O'Neil is one of those characters who can be transformed into 1,000 different faces, 1,000 different representations, and she's always positive. She's always sharp and witty. She's always kind of in control of her own world. Sometimes she's a journalist, sometimes she's a spy, sometimes she's in trouble, sometimes she's not, sometimes she's Caucasian, sometimes she's a teenager, sometimes she's an adult, sometimes she's African American, and that's the joy of what the Turtles do. Is the concept is so strong that and almost any iteration you want to throw at it. In that way, you're going to laugh, but it's rather like Shakespeare. Shakespeare is so strong, we can do anything to Shakespeare, and we'll still have Shakespeare when it's over. The same thing is more or less true with Casey Jones, who first appears in the single issue Raphael special. Casey Jones is many things at once. He's kind of a homage to Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th. He was meant as a parody of the Punisher, he's a vigilante who goes out there, but he's all to take the law into his own hands. And at first, he and the Turtles are adversaries, but then they tend to work together. But he also has this kind of wonderful humor to him. People tend to enjoy his sort of scruffiness. And this is a fan rendering, a digital fan rendering of all the different Casey Jones that are out there. And this shows you that this is a fan studying, learning. Maybe this fan is Casey Jones crazy, but I think he's just more interested, they are just more interested in playing with the different forms and shapes of what this character can be and say, which is, again, all about diversity, all about acceptance, all about the multiplicity and the multifacetedness of how these characters interact. This is the road to the Turtle movies. So as I've done a lot of this, and people can always watch this on their own if they like. In 1984, they developed the independent bi-monthly comic established by Mirage. They used tax refunds, personal savings, and loans from relatives to print up 50,000 copies. In total, the first 3,000 are priced at $1.50. The distributors buy them for $60. The first 3,000 sell out in 3 weeks. In 1986, Mark Friedman, who's creating his new Surge licensing company, pitches the Turtles to the Playmates toy executives. Playmates is a very successful toy company, most known for the Turtle toys, but also for its creation of Star Trek toys in the 90s. Salas realizes kind of right away, the Turtles put fun back in action figures. They love true piece of pizza. You can't even take the name seriously, and everybody sees where that's kind of going. That leads to some pretty fast adaptations in media, which leads to some pretty fast money making. And then we'll just skip down to the bottom here with the first four. Let's see, so make sure I get this right. Within the first 4 years of Turtle Mania, we have $1 billion in Turtle sales. So that's pretty substantial stuff. And I'm almost done. My friend Jonathan Alexandrados, that I co-write with now and again, has quickly put together a fun view of the Turtle toys. These are the pitch turtles that were used just to sort of pitch the idea. These are the finished toys. This is the sculptor who's in charge of all the non-turtle characters, and you can see the time and the care and the style that's gone into those. Beautifully done. This is one of the rarest characters that people pay between $1,000 to $5,000 for, which tells you something about a toy. The Turtles were so popular, they sumoized them. They made them into trolls to sort of cross market. They produced massive action figure sets like the Technodrome, which has been redone. Things that kids love because they made their parents mad, like the Flush-O-Matic. They put April, the Rockin' Reporter, on a dinosaur at one point. No one's really sure why. And I love that they put the turtle mask on the dinosaur. They go on tour through with a bunch of different merchandising tie-ins, largely through Pizza Hut. And then, of course, the iconic cereal bowls and cookie jars that every kid begged for and that are at every garage sale now. But my favorite of all of them is the Kraft Easy Cheese Cracker Topper, which you bought with your Easy Cheese, and then you could shape your Easy Cheese into turtle heads and take it from there. There's also a large group of rip-off illegal turtle toys, and even Kevin Eastman has been given his own action figure, which is actually legit. So to finish up, the Turtles have persisted longer at the top of the market of comics, toys, and broadcast media than almost anything else ever has. There's a lot of popular criticism of the toys that you can find on blogs and Facebook pages and social media pages all over. Kevin Eastman still works with Turtle Properties. He worked with Heavy Metal and owned Heavy Metal for a time, and he still works with science fiction hybrid stories. He's done several episodes of Love, Death, and Robots. Peter Laird also works still with the Turtle Properties and created a nonprofit foundation to help new creators get stuff off the ground. And we have new readers, fans, and players every single day, thanks to one wacky night of TV in Dover, New Hampshire, and which brought us all these wonderful cowabungas together. So that's what I've got for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Yesbick, for that talk. I've put into the chat, the Woodman Museum in Dover now has a new exhibit on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It opened in September. So if you would like to go see the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and see an exhibit about all of the background that Professor Yesbick has given us, you can see that at the Woodman Museum. For some reason, that information is not yet on their website, but you can use the website to figure out how to visit them. Hopefully you've gotten great reading ideas from Professor Yesbick. I now have an entire list of comics that I would need to go look at. We want to make sure that you have an opportunity to ask questions. I haven't yet seen any in the Q&A. The other thing you can do is briefly type in your excitement about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles if you want to, and share with people that way. While I'm giving you a minute to see if you want to put in any questions, I'll let you know our next Humanities at Home is January 24th. It'll be about rethinking the U.S. national parks with Professor Abby Good. Really a question about sustainability and community and sort of who belongs. As always, these programs are brought to you by the National Endowment for the Humanities and with support from New Hampshire residents. We do ask that if you're willing, you fill out one of our surveys regarding Humanities at Home. We're in the process of sort of thinking through Humanities at Home, and we always welcome your comments. You'll get an email from us, and Becky will also put the link in the chat. Is there anybody that wanted to ask Professor Yesbick questions about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Oh, great. There's a very nice comment in the chat. Many thanks, well presented and very enjoyable. And some other comments in the chat as well. So thank you for those. We really appreciate that.
Sure. It was great fun. I'll have to see what I can learn about the museum exhibit. It looks wonderful.
Again, please support the programs you love, but also remember to take our survey. And if you do develop questions that you can't articulate right this second, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll share your questions with Professor Yesbick. Oh,
yes, I'm very happy to answer anything.
Questions are coming in now.
Okay.
Hello from the UK. Someone's writing us.
Oh, wonderful.
United Kingdom. Can we just have a quick mention of Kevin Eastman's own attempt to pay it forward to match Laird's Xeric Foundation? Apparently he runs a Tundra US and UK program.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't put Tundra in there because I wasn't sure what the status of it was right now. I know there's some reorg going on, and I'm going to be lucky. I'm hopefully going to be spending some time with Kevin Eastman in February at a trade show. And one of my first questions is how can I help you, or how do you want me to make people know about Tundra again? Tundra has been doing it's got a wonderful legacy. I just don't know what the current I think no one knows because they're getting ready to tell us. That's my guess.
Another question we've gotten is, what is an underground artist?
Great question. So for years, almost every comic book in America was a mainstream publication sold through drugstores and supermarkets and newsstands and bus stations and things like that. And the big publishers, Dell, Archie, Marvel, DC, Charlton, to places like that would produce the comics and they would sell them. In the 1960s, it begins, like many things in the 60s, in the San Francisco Haight-Ashbury neighborhood, where all of the countercultural stuff is taking place. A lot of the psychedelic poster artists start creating comics, and they are, to be polite, the correct word would be uncensored. They are extreme. They're full of crime and drug use and stereotyping and all kinds of other ribal crazy stuff. And they get the name Underground Comics with an X, Comix. And they are narratively very, very out there, very psychedelic. In terms of content, they're very, very satiric. They're sort of attacking mainstream conventional social values. This is where R. Crumbs Fritz the Cat comes from. This is also really the earliest seed ground for Art Spiegelman's Mouse. This is where the Pulitzer Prize winning mouse kind of gets its first moments, when Spiegelman's toying around in the underground. And as I said, the underground comics that are really, some of them are really quite shocking. They really die out by the mid 1970s, but the alternative market that picks up after that is the market that responds to the Turtles when they first appear. So one evolves, the underground comics movement evolves into the independent alternative comics market.
I'm going to ask you one last question before
Sure.
you go, which may be the most controversial of the whole night.
I think I know what it is. Go ahead.
Who is your favorite
Yep. Yeah,
and
who's my
why?
favorite turtle? That's always a big one. I think the favorite turtle for most people has always been Raphael, because he's the most Daredevil-like. He wears his heart on his sleeve. He tries to be tough, but he's super sensitive, and he's always very solipsistic and not sure of himself, and also the most ferocious warrior, and he always comes back. I have always liked Leonardo myself. I've always liked his sort of quiet, um, uh, uh, he doesn't have a need to lead. He knows he's the one that must lead because all the others have other jobs. And I've always liked that about him. And even when I was a kid, I was an older kid. I was a teenager when these first appeared. Um, and I thoroughly enjoyed the fact that they are so funny, but they're also so dead serious with their interior psychology, right? They have great humor back and forth. They have great satires of things going on in the world around them and things in the comics world, but they also just tell great adventure stories. And the moment to moment combat stuff is a lot of fun. But it's those deep interior moments that are sort of serious, that then get played out with some kind of comedy that really is. Leonardo is one of the best examples of that. So, but I'm an equal turtle lover. I'm an equal opportunity fan. I've never met a turtle that I didn't enjoy.
And I think the last two questions that are there, I'll read for you,
Sure.
but I just wanted to make sure people know that we try very hard to end on time. We're now at about 6 minutes after. If you need to leave, please feel free. We're just going to take a couple more minutes. I find this pairing of questions fascinating. Are the constant reboots of the continuity necessary for a kid's property, paired with any comment on the use of the Roman cingulum by Raphael? Obviously,
Oh
it's not a
man.
kid's property if we're talking about the Roman cingulum.
Um, what a fascinating question. So I don't have a comment on that, but I can tell you that it has been talked about, and I have seen people, and I know that both creators have talked about it, uh, also. The their apparatus, their gear, their support. That's part of the thing that sort of changes now and again. I'm not sure that has deep meaning for Raphael himself, but again, I haven't kept up with a lot of the. There's so many turtle stories. It takes a real commitment to read them all. That may have been touched on here and there. I'm not sure. I know in the Michael Zulli stories, everything they wear has pretty intense significance. Um, the other question was what again? Sorry.
Do we need so many reboots for
Oh,
narrative
yeah.
continuity when it's a
Okay.
kid's story?
This, unfortunately, this question is easy to answer.
Mm.
We really don't. Why do we keep, and we do need reboots every once in a while because every new generation of kids has new tastes, new interests, whatever it might be. Real issue there is the fact that Hollywood and the toy companies and the media franchises, if something runs too long, they get nervous and they think, oh, it's going to get played out. They're always paranoid and worried, even if something is a massive hit, like the Turtles or Phineas and Ferb or SpongeBob. They still worry this is going to be the year it all falls apart. And these are not creatives. These are uh, people looking at the profits. These are the bean counters and the accountants, and that's all important. The money is important. There's no question that it isn't. But the tradition in children's media is always to reboot as often as possible, and sometimes you can reboot so much that people lose interest completely. Or these days we tend to have 3 or 4 different titles going or series going at the same time, especially on TV. One for very little kids, one for grade school kids, one for teenagers and junior high, and then one for the adults, maybe sometimes all through different networks. They're trying to hit every market they possibly can. So the need to reboot is not a creative need. It is a financial need. It is a production-based need. The good news about the need to reboot, and sometimes the reboots are terrible, they do 2 things. They empower the fans to sit there and say, to compare the 17 different versions of Raphael or the 17 different Shredders we've seen, and they get to choose their favorites and compare what gets carried over and what changes and what doesn't. And they also employ thousands of new creators. Right? It gives them jobs. It gives them a way to become part of the Turtle legacy. It gives them something they can build their resume with to work in other places. So there's a lot of good that comes out of all the reboots. It's just sometimes you just want them to leave it all alone. But that's just not how our media industry works, and it probably never will. So that's why.
Thank you very
Sure.
much.
Anything.
Hopefully everybody got their answers. And we really appreciate your time. Thank you,
Thank you
everyone,
so
for
much, Beth. Thank
attending.
you, everyone, for coming. I really appreciate it. It was a great audience. Thank you.
Have a great night. Thank you.